fly on into the to the airport. Our final approach speed, turning final, is about 95 knots, and we're decelerating throughout the final to 85 knots. And as we come across the airport boundary, or the fence as they say, pavement of the runway is starting to disappear right under the nose at this particular point in time. The captain is at 80 knots. Now throughout the final approach, if I were flying the airplane, I would have briefed my co-pilot and I would have him calling out airspeeds. That way he is checking against the airspeed against the flaps to make sure that we're at the correct speed. So two of us are basically doing the same job. And on final approach, the pilot is looking out the window. His head is not in the cockpit, so the co-pilot is calling out airspeed variations. Now keep in mind that the captain has glanced occasionally at his airspeed, but he also has the co-pilot monitoring for him. And the captain, I would ask the co-pilot to tell me when I have a 5-knot variation. If I'm supposed to be at 85 knots in the short end of my final, and my speed begins to deteriorate, the co-pilot will call out in a 5-knot. Either my airspeed is increased to 90 knots and he'll call airspeed 90, or he'll say airspeed 80 knots. That way I know immediately what to do. I either need to raise the nose a little bit, or I need to add a little bit of power, or I need to reduce power. Whatever it is I need to do, I know what to do. My co-pilot has advised me of my airspeed. So we now have the runway rolling under the pilot's vision. We're at 80 knots. We want to make sure that our vertical speed, and this is just a sensory thing, but typically the touchdown, the vertical speed indicator should be 200 feet per minute descent or less. If you are approaching and have a descent rate of more than 200 feet a minute, my experience is that you cannot arrest the descent and level off fast enough, and you are going to bounce. And when the DC-3 bounces, it is one huge embarrassing bounce, because the airplane has large low pressure tires. There's only 40-pound air maintained in the tires, and it will propel the airplane back into the air for a huge bounce. The only way to recover from that is a generous amount of throttle, regain some airspeed, and you approach and re-land the airplane, or go around if it's bad enough. So when we fly the airplane, we fly it onto the runway with a vertical descent of 200 feet a minute or less. Probably it's more like 50 or 75 feet. We roll the airplane on the runway with a wheel landing, with the main wheels only. The tail is in the air. A little bit of forward pressure is applied to the control yoke to keep the wheels on the ground and the tail up in the air in the flight position. And once we're firmly on the ground, the throttles can be retarded to idle, and the pilot will gently, as his speed deteriorates, set the tail on the ground smoothly. He will not hold the tail up to the point that the airflow finally deteriorates over the elevators and the tail flops on the ground by itself. That will damage the airplane. That's a no-no. Pilot sets the tail wheel onto the ground and continues to track straight down the runway. That's the end of the landing. It really is a very simple procedure. Sounds complicated. I like to say that the DC-3 is a very easy airplane to fly. In some instances it takes, you have to really manhandle it, but in other circumstances it requires a lot of finesse to properly fly a DC-3. Otherwise, it can really embarrass you. The other thing about the DC-3, you can see pictures in the Movie Tone News. You can probably have seen it in movies on television. The DC-3 can be landed in the three-point position, but the manuals recommend that it be wheel landed only, keeping the tail in the air. The reason being is if you land it in the three-point position and you misjudge it, and the tail hits first, you can break the back of the airplane right at where the entry door is. You actually bend the fuselage, and when that happens, the airplanes are right off, probably. So the safe way to land a DC-3 is to always wheel land it.